Lioness Season 3 has reached the point where the biggest danger may no longer be the enemy Joe can see. After everything that has happened so far, Episode 5 looks ready to push the story into an entirely different level of espionage. The official episode information reveals that Joe leads the hunt as her team begins exposing a hidden network operating through covert handlers, while Kaitlyn and Westfield scramble to understand the scale of the threat. But here's where things get interesting. The deeper Joe digs, the more it appears that this operation isn't simply about finding one Russian operative or stopping one attack. There may be an entire net. Then the attack on Joe's home may have been only the beginning. Let's break down what Episode 5 could be setting up. One of the biggest changes heading into Episode 5 is the shift in power. For much of this season, Joe has been reacting. Her home was attacked. Her family was placed in danger. She became the target of an operation that seemed to know far too much about her. But now Joe appears to be turning the situation around. Instead of simply asking who attacked her, she can start asking a much more dangerous question. Who gave the order? That distinction matters. An attack team can be eliminated. A network is much harder to destroy. And if Joe discovers that the people behind the operation have multiple handlers, contacts, and assets operating in different locations, taking down one enemy could actually expose 10 more. That could explain why Episode 5 is being positioned around a hidden network rather than a single villain. Joe may finally be pulling on the thread that connects everything, and the more she pulls, the more dangerous the truth becomes. One of the most important developments leading into Episode 5 is Oleksandra. She has already demonstrated an extraordinary understanding of American intelligence operations and has provided information connecting Russian influence to American political figures. Her intelligence was important enough for Joe to consider using her as bait in a counterintelligence operation. But there's a problem. The more information Oleksandra provides, the more questions she creates. How does she know so much? How deeply is she actually connected to Russian intelligence? And most importantly, can Joe completely trust the information she's giving them? This could become the shocking twist of Episode 5. What if Oleksandra isn't necessarily lying about the network, but she's carefully controlling how much of the truth the CIA gets to see? That would make her incredibly dangerous, because the most effective intelligence operation isn't always about giving someone false information. Sometimes it's about giving them just enough truth to make them walk exactly where you want them to go. Remember what Joe decided to do. Instead of immediately exposing everything about Oleksandra, the CIA planned to use deception to provoke the Russian network and see who reacted. On paper, that's a classic intelligence strategy. But there's another possibility. What if the enemy already knows the CIA is setting a trap? This is where the season's central theme becomes extremely important. Everyone is watching everyone. Joe is watching Oleksandra. The Russians may be watching Joe. Oleksandra may be watching both sides. And somewhere in the middle are American officials whose loyalties may not be as straightforward as they appear. That creates the perfect environment for a double cross. Joe could believe she's hunting the enemy while unknowingly helping the enemy identify the CIA's vulnerabilities. And if that happens, Episode 5 could reveal that the operation we've been watching isn't actually Joe's operation anymore. It belongs to whoever has been one step ahead of her. Joe isn't the only person who needs to be worried. Kaitlyn and Westfield are also trying to determine exactly how serious the situation has become. The official synopsis specifically places them in the middle of assessing the threat, while Joe leads the hunt. And that separation could be very important. Joe is in the field. Kaitlyn and Westfield are looking at the bigger intelligence picture. That means they may discover something Joe doesn't know yet. Imagine Joe believes she's chasing a group of foreign handlers, only for Kaitlyn to discover that the network reaches into American institutions. Suddenly, the mission changes. It's no longer find the enemy. It becomes find out who inside the system is helping the enemy. And that would bring the story directly back to the 5 US senators mentioned in the previous revelations. If even part of that political network is real, Episode 5 could be where the investigation stops being a foreign intelligence story and becomes an American infiltration story. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. We already know Season 3 has been using a flash-forward structure involving Joe's eventual capture. Episode 3 ended with a disturbing glimpse of Joe in Russian custody, chained to a bed, while an American press conference played in front of her. So the question isn't simply, Will Joe get captured? We already know that something happens. The real question is, what causes it? And episode 5 could give us the answer. If Joe's investigation gets too close to the hidden network, the enemy may realize that the only way to stop the investigation is to remove Joe from the board. That would make her eventual capture much more logical. But here's the theory I find even more interesting. What if Joe's capture isn't caused by a mistake? What if she intentionally allows herself to be captured? Think about it. If the enemy refuses to reveal its inner circle, Joe could potentially use herself as bait. She could become the target that forces the network to expose its most important players. Of course, that strategy would be incredibly dangerous, because once you're inside enemy custody, there is no guarantee you can get back out. Another character worth watching closely is Cruz. Cruz understands what it means to be used as a lioness better than almost anyone. She has already experienced the psychological cost of becoming the weapon in someone else's operation. And if Joe begins making increasingly dangerous decisions, Cruz could become one of the few people capable of recognizing where this is heading. There's also a fascinating possibility here. What if Joe eventually needs someone to do for her what she once did for Cruz? A lioness operation built around extracting information from inside the enemy's network would create a perfect opportunity for Cruz to return to the center of the story. Not necessarily as the primary operative, but as someone who understands the psychology of the mission, and that could create a powerful parallel between Joe and Cruz. Joe spent seasons teaching other women how to survive impossible missions. Now she may need one of them to save her. The episode 5 title itself deserves attention. The Idiot Army. That title doesn't sound random. Lioness frequently uses military language and animal metaphors to describe intelligence operations, power structures, and manipulation. So who exactly is the Idiot Army? It could refer to disposable operatives. People recruited by larger organizations who don't even understand the real mission they're participating in. And that would fit perfectly with the idea of a hidden network. The people Joe encounters may not actually be the masterminds. They could simply be pieces on the board. Which means Joe could spend episode 5 eliminating enemies without realizing that the real target is sitting much higher up. And that would make the eventual reveal far more shocking. Because the person Joe thinks she's hunting may actually be protecting the person she should have been hunting all along. There's another storyline we cannot ignore. Joe's family has already become directly connected to the danger surrounding her work. Season 3 has deliberately blurred the line between Joe's professional life and her life at home. The official season description emphasizes that the war is reaching into every part of her life. That's important because Joe has always been willing to sacrifice herself. But her family changes the equation. An enemy doesn't necessarily need to defeat Joe physically. They only need to convince her that her family is in danger. And that's exactly how you control someone like Joe. You don't attack the strongest part of the lioness. You attack the thing she refuses to lose. So if episode 5 shows another threat approaching her family, don't assume it's simply there for emotional drama. It could be the enemy's most sophisticated weapon. Here's my biggest theory for episode 5. The hidden network may not exist simply to gather intelligence. It may exist to manipulate the CIA into destroying itself. Think about the chain of events. A foreign operative provides information. The CIA responds. Joe launches an operation. The enemy reacts. That reaction exposes another person. And the CIA follows that lead. But what if every step is being anticipated? What if someone has designed the entire sequence so that American intelligence keeps chasing targets that are intentionally placed in front of them? That would explain why the season feels increasingly paranoid. The real enemy wouldn't need to defeat the CIA in a direct confrontation. They would simply need to manipulate its decision-making. And if that's the game we're watching, then Joe may already be inside the trap. Episode 5 could therefore be the point where the season's separate mysteries finally start connecting. Joe's investigation, Oleksandra's intelligence, the Russian network, the American political connections, the threat to Joe's family, and the eventual capture we've already seen in the flash forward. All of these pieces may be leading toward one revelation. Joe isn't just being hunted because she's a dangerous CIA operative. She may be being hunted because she has unknowingly discovered something that someone desperately needs to remain hidden, and that makes her more dangerous alive than dead. Because if Joe survives long enough to connect the dots, the entire network could collapse. But here's the question I want you to think about. What if the person Joe trusts most is actually the person who has been guiding her toward the trap? If that theory is correct, Episode 5 could completely change how we interpret everything we've seen so far. And if Joe's capture is coming, the biggest mystery may not be how she escapes. It may be who betrays her before she ever gets the chance. What do you think? Is Oleksandra genuinely helping Joe, or is she manipulating the CIA from the inside? And who do you think is really behind the hidden network? Drop your theory in the comments, because if Episode 5 reveals even one more piece of this puzzle, we could finally understand why Joe's story ends up with her chained inside that Russian prison. Subscribe for more Lioness Season 3 trailer breakdowns, theories, hidden clues, and ending explanations. Because the closer Joe gets to the truth, the closer the truth may get to destroying her.